Assalamualaikum and a very good day to Madam and all of my viewers. My name is Atikah Binti Mohd Ghazali and my metric number is 207518. Today, I am going to explain my thoughts on this one beautiful poem entitled On the Sea by John Keats. So let me introduce a bit about this poet, which was John Keats. John Keats was actually an English poet which was born in 1795 and was a poet whose verse is known for its vivid imagery and great sensuous appeal. So this wonderful poet was written in 1817 when John Keats was on a holiday at the Isle of Wight, England. So this work of his was actually being published on London newspaper called The Champion after John Keats' friend named John Reynolds submitted it to the London newspaper. So before we start with the analysis of the poem, let me tell you about his way of writing poems, the writing style that he used when he wrote his poem. So his style of writing is characterized by sensual imagery and contains many poetic devices such as alliteration, personification, assonance, consonants, and also metaphors. So next, I am going to recite this poem and you guys can actually listen and try to understand the deep meaning of this poem that the persona wanted to deliver to his readers and listeners. It keeps eternal whisperings around desolate shores, and with its mighty swell gluts twice 10,000 caverns, till the spell of Hecate lifts them their old shadowy sound. Often this in such gentle temper found, that scarcely will the very smallest shell be moved for days from where it sometime fell, when last the winds of heaven were unbound. O you, who have your eyeballs vexed and tired, feast them upon the wideness of the sea. O you, whose ears are dimmed with uproar rude, or fed too much with cloying melody, sit you near some old cavern's mouth and brood, until you start, as if the sea nymphs choired. So that is a very good poem written by John Keats, and if we read and think critically of the poem, the meaning behind it, we can actually relate to it. So after listening to my recitation of this poem just now, could you think of the messages that the persona brought up into this poem? Maybe you would have the general idea about what the poet wanted to tell in this poem, but let me add up some more of my opinions so that you will have a better understanding about it. So briefly, this poem was actually about John Keats, this poet, advises the listeners who especially were having some difficulties or troubles in lives to go visit the sea. Just go sit and watch the wideness of the sea, as it has some kind of capabilities to act as a therapy that can heal these people who are in need of healing. So the persona also asked these listeners, these people, to enjoy the wideness of the sea, listen to the sound of the sea, the waves, and eventually it could slowly refresh, or it could give some relaxing and calming effect to these people. Next, do you have any idea about what is the subject of this poem? Yes, the subject of this poem is actually the sea, as it is the main subject or the main element that the persona focused onto. So in this poem, we can actually notice that it emphasized on the power, the gentleness of the nature, and the nature's capability to refresh people's mind and replace it with something, I could say, peaceful and relaxing. So, and then as I go through this poem by John Keats, I can think of the theme as the power of the nature, which is the sea. The sea actually has the ability to give or provide the feelings of freedom and peace and also calm to the humans by just looking at it. How wonderful is it? So, and it has also the capability to turn people's noisy mind into something peaceful. Hence, I think that will be the main reasons on why the persona suggested the listeners who have some troubles in lives to take some time and go visit the sea. And then by looking through this poem, you could tell that the rhyme scheme of the poem follows the pattern of A B B A A, B B A, C D E D E C, as it was determined by just identifying the alliteration involved at the end of each line. And the structure of the poem is actually sonnet. And if you do not know what sonnet is, it is actually a poem that has 14 lines, which we can see here. We have three first stanza with 4 lines each, and it ends with a couplet stanza. So let us take a look at this poem by lines. In this first line, it said that it keeps eternal whisperings around desolate shores, which it here was actually the sea, and the whisperings was like the human tone when speaking. So when we speak, we use different tones, and sometimes we also whisper as in a way to lower the volume of our voices. So that seems related to the sea as well. And then the desolate shores was like the situation of an empty site. And with its mighty swell gluts twice 10,000 caverns, which this might indicate to the tides of the sea that could swallow the large caverns if it wanted to. So this was like the persona actually emphasized on the powerful ability that the sea actually have. And then it mentioned the spell of Hecate, which Hecate was the goddess of the earth that has the ability to control the moon, the sea, and also the earth. And then the next line, it said about another significant characteristics of the sea, which was its gentleness, that it could leave the smallest shell unmoved for days. So we could actually imagine the smallest shell. It was very light in weight, and the shell was actually being touched by the waves on the seaside, but at the same time it would just remain at the same place at where it fell. And moving on, when last the winds of heaven were unbound, this might indicate to the force of strong winds from heaven. In the forward lines, the persona pointed out some specific listeners, which the ones who were having eyeballs filled with anger or worries, and that it led them to be tired and weary. So it said, "O you who have your eyeballs vexed and tired," and you here indicated to these people that were having some troubles or difficulties in life. And then the word feast here seems connected to the word gods in the first stanza, and these were almost similar words that the persona wrote in this poem. Feast them upon the wideness of the sea, which meant that the persona told the listeners to treat or to let the vastness of the sea to have or to absorb those troubles that these people had. And the persona also mentioned about another significant and affected areas aside from just tired eyes, which was the ears. This line, "O you whose ears are dimmed with uproar root," might be ears of people who had been listening to damaging sound or hurtful words from their surroundings. So we could also see that the words "O you" were repeated, and that these words both were designated to these people who were having troubles in life. and then fed too much with cloying melody that brought meaning of the ears that were constantly listening or captured the sounds that were sickening, perhaps the sounds that irritated them to listen to. And then the last couplet stanza, it said about the persona asked the listeners to actually sit near the sea and brood. So this was like to think deeply of the problems, and later, until later, you will start as if the sea nymphs quiet, which the sea nymphs was actually the spirit of the sea. It was a friendly nature in the sea that lived with a total harmony with other creatures. Now let us look deeper into the meaning behind this poem. So what did the poet actually wanted to tell us by this poem? So the first line said that the sea has the ability to whisper eternally around the desolate shores. In my opinion, the whispers were actually the metaphor to the sound of the waves, and the desolates there would be the personification of melancholy or the sorrowful mood that the persona brought up, for he wanted the listeners to feel it when listening to this poem. So when I read this poem, I could actually imagine the sound of the waves that could bring me the calming effect, the relaxing effect. And then the poet said that with its mighty swell gluts twice 10,000 caverns. This may be the force of nature, the powerful ability of the sea, that it could swallow the large caverns if it wanted to. And this also brought another imagery, which is a visual imagery of the caverns near the sea. Next, till the spell of Hecate lifts them their old shadowy sound. Well, this would be that the Hecate, which was the goddess of the earth, she could control the moon and the tides of the waves. She could control the waves to swallow the large caverns and then left it with their dark and shadowy sound. So these 4 lines of the first stanza described mainly about the powerful side of the sea, the various capabilities of the sea. And then moving on to the next 4 lines, which it started with the persona highlighted about another side or another characteristics of the sea, which was its gentleness. So there was a dichotomy, a contrast between these 4 lines with the previous 4 lines. And the first 4 lines actually describe the powerful side of the sea, and then these 4 lines were about the gentleness side of the sea. So these 2 characteristics were different, and that it showed the oppositeness of the splendid capabilities of the sea, splendid abilities of the sea. It said that the sea has the ability to touch the smallest shell, but at the same time to leave it unmoved for days. And it also said that when last the winds of heaven were unbound. So this was like there were the winds from heaven, the strong force, the strong winds that could actually affect the heavy and strong movement of the tides, which later could shift the smallest shell. And the shell here might be the metaphor to the noisy minds of the humans, the people. So it could touch this shell but left it unmoved for days, and as in a way that it could somehow penetrate into the human's mind, as to help these heavy-minded people to feel the peaceful, the calming effect, and that the sea brought into their minds. So it was like another phenomenal, another remarkable ability of the sea here. And then there was also a kinesthetic imagery involved here, that it represented the movement of the tides when the winds were unbound. And then that will be related to the next lines of this poem, which the persona actually specifically pointed out the listeners who were struggling with their problems or the pressures of their life that they were facing. Okay, and then the next line we could see that the persona eventually pointed out the specific listeners who could relate to this poem. It said that, "Oh, you who have your eyeballs vexed and tired." So this much likely referred to the ones who were feeling worried or maybe frustrated. So the persona told these listeners to feast them upon the wideness of the sea, the weariness, the frustrations. Yeah. And then the persona highlighted about the vastness of nature, which was the sea, and the sea could somehow save these people who has a lot of pressures in their lives, who have a lot in their minds. And next, it also told us another struggles faced by the humans whose ears are dimmed with uproar root or fed too much with cloying melody, which meant that the listeners who might have heard of too much of uneasy or hurtful words that kept their minds noisy, and that it led their life to be difficult or unhappy. And then the last two lines was like the endmost solution to these specific listeners. The persona actually suggested the ones who were having hard times in life to sit and watch the wideness of the sea, for it has the power to heal them. It could act as a therapy to these people who were struggling with their problems. And then the line "brood until you start as if the sea nymphs quiet," which this indicated that these people should bring themselves along with those problems in their mind near the sea, and later there would be some kind of like magic, the sea nymphs that could refresh these people's minds. There were magic that was somehow in charge to be the healing agents, to cure or to give the peace to the people who were in need of it. So that is all from my opinions and thoughts regarding this beautiful poem by John Keats. I hope you can get some additional or new knowledge from this video, and thank you so much for watching.